The jungle swallowed everything, sound, light, even the sense of time. Australian boots moved through it like shadows, each step measured, each breath controlled. No talking, no sudden movements. Only the quiet rhythm of men who understood that one mistake could turn the world into gunfire. For months, Viet Cong commanders mocked these slow Australian patrols, believing they were too cautious, too deliberate, too few in number to matter. But the mocking stopped the day those commanders finally saw what these small, disciplined teams could do, how they struck from silence, how they vanished without a trace, and how a handful of men could unravel an entire network of enemy scouts. Imagine standing in that heat, the air thick enough to drink, knowing unseen eyes are watching you. Imagine realizing those eyes belong to men who underestimated you, until now. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. The jungle had its own way of judging men. It didn't care about rank, training, or reputation. It cared only about who paid attention and who didn't. In Phuoc Thai province, Australian patrols learned this truth every day, moving through the thick, tangled green with the patience of hunters. But far across the tree line, their enemy, Viet Cong scouts, watched them with amused confidence. The mocking had already begun. To the VC commanders, the Australians looked slow, too deliberate, too cautious. While American patrols often moved with force and momentum, Australians seemed to drift through the bush like old men on a long walk. They advanced in small numbers, 4 men, 6 men, maybe 8, not enough, the VC thought, to do real damage. The commanders believed they understood every rhythm, every predictable pattern of these foreign soldiers. They didn't realize the Australians moved slowly on purpose. A typical Australian patrol began before dawn, when the air was still cool enough to breathe without feeling like you were swallowing steam. Men checked their gear in silence: water bottles, magazines, bayonets, maps, radios. A hand on a friend's shoulder meant ready. A nod meant let's move. No words. Sound traveled too far in the jungle, bouncing off the dense undergrowth and giving away position. Spacing was everything. Each man stayed at least 5 meters apart, sometimes more, close enough to support each other, far enough that a single burst of enemy fire wouldn't hit the entire patrol. The point man led with careful steps, scanning for tripwires, punji pits, or sudden changes in bird calls. Behind him, the second man repeated the scan, checking what the point might have missed. The rest followed with a steady rhythm, boots sliding, not stomping, rifles held high to avoid vines and branches. The jungle wasn't just thick, it was alive. Cicadas screamed so loudly it felt like the air was vibrating. Leeches clung to boots and socks, turning every step into a sticky battle. Sweat dripped into eyes. Mosquitoes swarmed exposed skin. Even so, the Australians stayed focused. They never rushed. Rushing meant noise. Noise meant death. This discipline puzzled the Viet Cong scouts. From their perspective, the Australians moved like they were afraid. They stopped often, listened too much, stared at the ground too long. To the VC, who prided themselves on speed, stealth, and knowledge of the terrain, these behaviors looked like weakness. One VC commander was known to joke: if the Australians walked any slower, the trees would grow over them. His scouts laughed, confident in their ability to monitor and outmaneuver these slow walkers. They trailed the Australians from a distance, careful never to reveal themselves. They left subtle signs: broken branches, faint marks in the mud, rearranged leaves, believing the Australians would never notice. But the Australians always noticed. A patrol led by Corporal Ian McAllister moved through a narrow patch of jungle where the canopy pressed so tightly overhead that the world turned dim. Mac had done dozens of patrols. He trusted his training and trusted his men even more. He paused, raising a clenched fist. The patrol froze instantly. He knelt and inspected the ground. A small indentation in the mud. Not deep, light enough to be made by someone moving carefully. A leaf beside it was bent the wrong way, as if placed back by hand rather than by nature. Mac didn't smile, but he felt the familiar spark of alertness. Someone had been here. Recently, he studied the jungle ahead. No movement, no voices, only the pulse of insects and the distant call of a hidden bird. To most people, the jungle sounded chaotic. To trained soldiers, its patterns were predictable. When those patterns broke, even slightly, you noticed. Mac tapped the shoulder of the man behind him and made the silent signal for enemy nearby. The word spread backward through the patrol without a single sound. The Australians didn't tense up or panic. They adjusted their spacing, slowed even further, and shifted into a tighter formation. The radio operator kept his hand on the handset, ready to call for support if needed. The rear scout checked their backdrill twice as often, calm, controlled, hyper-aware. The VC scouts watching from the brush saw none of this. They only saw a slow patrol becoming even slower. To them, it confirmed their mockery. These foreigners were cautious to the point of fear, but the Australians were not afraid. They were preparing. As the patrol moved deeper, the terrain shifted. The ground dipped into a shallow creek bed with thick vines hanging across it. Mac raised his fist again and signaled a short halt. He wanted to listen, really listen. Silence in the jungle was never complete, but sometimes it changed. Sometimes it became too still. A bird that had been calling a moment earlier went quiet. Mac noted the direction. Another subtle warning. 2 meters to his left, Private Dawson felt something too, a faint vibration underfoot, as if someone had stepped gently somewhere nearby. He didn't look around. He didn't whisper. He simply tapped Mac's shoulder twice, the signal for "I sense movement." These tiny signals formed the language of the Australian patrol, no words required. Every man trusted the others to notice what he missed. Mac made a decision. He guided the patrol off the predictable route and into a more tangled section of bush where visibility dropped to just a few meters. It was harder to move but easier to hide. If the VC thought they were tracking a predictable patrol, Mac would break that illusion now. This was the moment when the VC mocking began to shift, not yet to fear, but to confusion. Their predicted path changed. Their advantage slipped. They had to adjust. One scout whispered to his partner, "They are turning." "Why, they never turn here," his partner shrugged. "They are lost." But they weren't. The Australians climbed gently uphill until Mac found what he wanted, a slight rise overlooking the creek bed they had just crossed. He placed his men into a silent observation position, forming a rough arc. No noise, no movement. They melted into the foliage like shadows. Minutes passed, sweat dripped, muscles tightened. No one shifted, no one spoke. Then the VC scouts appeared, 3 of them, moving confidently along the Australians' original path. They whispered, pointed, joked quietly. They believed they were safe. Mac watched them through the leaves. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't signal to fire. This wasn't the place or time. Firing now would reveal their position and defeat the purpose of the mission. Instead, he quietly studied their faces, their spacing, their careless confidence. The mocking would end soon, he thought. Very soon. But not today. Today was about learning the enemy and letting the enemy think they understood him. The jungle changed after that day. Not physically. Its vines still hung like ropes. Its shadows still stretched long across the ground. But something in the air shifted. Mac and his patrol had seen the Viet Cong scouts. More importantly, they had watched the scouts move with an ease that spoke of confidence. Confidence meant patterns. Patterns meant weaknesses. The Australians began adjusting immediately. At first light the next morning, Mac gathered the patrol in a tight circle, kneeling in the damp grass. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Using quiet hand gestures, he laid out a new plan. Unpredictable movements, sharper angles, and altered routes. No more walking the same creek beds or following the same ridgelines. They would break their rhythm, force the VC scouts to question every assumption. Each soldier absorbed the instructions with calm focus. They trusted Mac. They trusted the system. Patrol spacing increased slightly, sometimes 10 meters now between each man. It made coordination harder but stealth easier. Noise discipline tightened even further. Rifle slings were checked again. Loose gear was taped down to prevent rattling. Even canteens were wrapped in cloth to stop them clinking when men moved. The Australians started to walk differently too, not in straight, predictable lines but in staggered, uneven patterns. They shifted pace from slow to slower, then suddenly paused, then continued at a medium rhythm before slowing again. This wasn't random. It was tactical deception. The Viet Cong scouts observing them grew confused within the first hour. Two scouts watched the Australians from a low rise covered in ferns. The patrol had altered direction 3 times without reason. One scout frowned and whispered, "They shouldn't be there. That is not the usual path." His partner squinted through the leaves. "Maybe they are lost." But the Australians weren't lost. They were shaping the battlefield. Mac's senses sharpened. The faint changes in the jungle, bird calls, rustling leaves, subtle vibrations, became signals. He noticed when the jungle felt wrong, when the silence seemed stretched too thin. Each time he sensed something, he stopped. The entire patrol froze instantly. They held still for minutes at a time, becoming part of the landscape. Sweat trickled down their backs. Ants crawled across their boots, but no one moved. Their breathing slowed until it was nearly silent. To the VC, this slow, steady rhythm looked like fear, but Mac understood something else. Patience was a weapon. As they pushed deeper into the terrain, Mac identified a perfect location for a trap. It was a place shaped like an open hand, thick bush on the edges, a narrow funnel in the center, and a concealed rise overlooking the clearing. If the VC scouts were confident enough to follow the patrol's old patterns, then this would be the place to catch them. He signaled the patrol to halt and began arranging them silently. The formation he created was an L-shaped ambush, one of the most effective small-team setups in jungle warfare. The long side of the L held the bulk of the firepower, rifles pointed directly into the funnel. The small side formed a shorter firing line positioned at a 90-degree angle, ready to catch anything that moved past the kill zone. Every soldier took a knee behind thick roots or fallen logs. Magazines were checked. Rifles rested on steady supports. No one spoke. The jungle grew still. Private Dawson, positioned in the short leg of the L, felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He controlled a critical flank. If the VC tried to break through, he would be the one to stop them. His pulse thudded in his ears, but his hands stayed steady. Dawson trusted his mates. He knew they trusted him. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into half an hour. The heat pressed down like a wet blanket. Damp air filled lungs. Mosquitoes hovered near ears. Still, no one moved. Then Mac felt it, the same subtle shift in the jungle he'd sensed earlier. A slight break in the pattern. A bird call that cut off mid-note. A leaf flutter that didn't match the wind. He raised 2 fingers, the silent signal, enemy approaching. Every man tightened his grip on his rifle, but no one fired. No one even breathed deeply. Through the brush, faint shapes appeared. 3 figures, then 5, then 7. The Viet Cong scouts moved confidently, stepping exactly where they expected the Australians to pass. Their rifles were held lazily, their posture relaxed. They believed they were tracking another slow, predictable patrol. Only one scout seemed uneasy. He stopped suddenly, glancing left, then right. He crouched, touched the ground, and frowned. "Something is wrong," he whispered to his partner. "No fresh prints," the partner shrugged. "They must have moved quickly. Come." But the uneasy scout remained cautious. He studied the clearing, the rise, the brush. For a moment it looked like he would call off the advance. Mac steadied his breathing and held his trigger finger still. Not yet. The VC scouts crept forward cautiously now, spreading out to scan the clearing. Their confidence was thinning, but they were already in the funnel, the exact space Mac wanted them in. Still, Mac waited. Engaging early risked giving the enemy a chance to escape and warn others. He needed them fully inside the kill zone. At last, the lead scout stepped past the invisible line Mac had set in his mind. The Australians didn't open fire. Not yet. This wasn't the ambush. This was the observation. Mac wanted to see how the scouts behaved, how they reacted when they realized the Australians had broken their patterns. He watched the lead scout's eyes widen slightly as he surveyed the terrain. The man wasn't stupid. He sensed danger. He stepped back, raising a hand to signal his unit to halt. His head turned slightly toward Mac's hidden position, just slightly. And then the jungle changed again, not from gunfire, not from movement, but from understanding. For the first time, the VC scouts realized the Australians weren't slow. They weren't predictable. They weren't afraid. They were waiting. Mac held his men firm, resisting the urge to spring the trap too early. This wasn't the right moment. Not yet, but the adjustment had worked. The VC scouts were unsettled now. Their mocking confidence had cracked. The Australians would strike soon, but on their terms, not the enemy's. And when they did, the jungle would remember. The Viet Cong scouts withdrew from the clearing with a tension none of them wanted to admit. Their confidence wasn't shattered, not yet, but a thin line of doubt ran through the group like a crack in solid stone. The jungle, which once felt like their home ground, now seemed to hold more questions than answers. As they moved back into the heavy brush, they spoke in low whispers. The uneasy scout from earlier, Fan, a veteran tracker, kept glancing over his shoulder. "They changed something," he muttered. His partner frowned. "They are just wandering, maybe they found nothing." Fan shook his head. "No, they are watching us, I felt it." The partner didn't reply. Neither of them had seen a single Australian soldier, not a face, not a weapon, not a boot print. It was as if the Australians had folded themselves into the jungle. Back on the ridge, Mac and his patrol watched the scouts withdraw. His men remained motionless, each one frozen behind roots and logs, breath steady, rifles quiet. The VC had stepped into the trap zone. They had sensed danger, but Mac didn't fire. He wanted something bigger. He wanted the VC commanders to rethink everything they believed about Australian patrols. When the scouts disappeared back into the trees, Mac tapped his radio operator and whispered the first actual word anyone had spoken in hours. "Move." The word spread backward through the patrol. Soldiers eased from their firing positions, stepping with the same slow, deliberate rhythm as before. Leeches clung to socks. Sweat soaked their greens. But no one complained. They shifted deeper into the jungle, leaving no trace, no bent leaf, no disturbed soil, nothing that would reveal their presence to even the sharpest tracker. The new plan was simple: stay invisible for as long as possible. Invisible meant unpredictable. Unpredictable meant fear. Fear changed tactics, and that was the real goal. Across the province, Viet Cong commanders gathered in a dim bunker carved into the side of a small hill. Light from a single lamp flickered across maps drawn on rough paper. Trails, creeks, and marked Australian patrol routes covered the surface. For months, they believed they had these patrols mapped perfectly. But today, their scouts reported something different. Fan stood before the commanders, helmet off, sweat streaking his face. "The Australians did not follow their usual path," he said. "They slowed even more. They changed direction many times. I believe they knew we were tracking them," a commander scoffed. "They always move slowly, they lack speed." Fan swallowed. This was different. They moved like hunters, not prey. The room grew quieter. The mocking tone softened. Confidence wavered. Another scout added, "They were there. I felt them, but we saw nothing." The commander's eyes narrowed. "Nothing? Nothing," Fan repeated. The bunker fell silent for several moments. Finally, the senior commander leaned forward. "If they are becoming like the SAS," he said, "then this is not good." The others shifted uncomfortably. The SAS, though few in number, were feared for their stealth and sudden violence. If regular infantry patrols started using similar techniques, it would complicate every VC movement in the province. Meanwhile, Mac and his patrol moved through terrain that seemed designed to break men. The vines tangled around boots, tree branches snagged on webbing. The humidity wrapped their lungs like wet cloth. Their shirts clung to their backs. Every breath tasted like damp earth. But they pushed on. They trusted Mac, and Mac trusted his instincts. He guided them toward a narrow ridge where he suspected the VC scouts might regroup. This wasn't an ambush location. It was an observation post, high ground with a thick canopy that allowed them to extend their view deeper into enemy territory. When they reached the ridge, the Australians settled into a silent defensive perimeter. Each man covered a different arc. No one sat down, no one removed gear. Even in rest positions, they stayed ready. Hours passed, bird calls shifted, shadows grew longer. The jungle pressed in around them like a living force. Then they heard it. Voices, soft, careful, drifting up the slope. The VC scouts had returned. Mac lowered himself into a prone position, easing his rifle forward. Through a narrow gap in the leaves, he could see movement, Fan and 3 others picking their way through the brush. They weren't mocking now. Their shoulders were tight, their rifles were raised. They were alert. The earlier confidence was gone. Mac watched closely. He wanted to see how they moved when they weren't underestimating him. The scouts were actually good, quiet, disciplined, aware. But Mac noticed something. They kept checking the wrong areas. Their mental map was still shaped by assumptions of how Australians usually behaved. They looked where they expected danger, not where danger was. This, Mac realized, was the edge. If he could break their patterns completely, he could seize initiative across the entire area of operations. One of his men, Private Henders, whispered barely above breath, "They're nervous now." Mac gave a tiny nod. He didn't need to speak. The VC scouts paused below the ridge, scanning the slope. Fan wiped sweat from his forehead and stared at the dense trees. His voice trembled slightly. "They are close," he muttered. "I know they are close." But the jungle gave him nothing. The Australians stayed completely still. No shifting weight, no cloth rustling, no clicking safety catches. Stillness was its own skill. It came from discipline, training, and sheer willpower. And it paid off now. After several tense minutes, the VC pulled back. Not in panic, but in caution. Their confidence had cracked, and the crack was widening. As the scouts disappeared again, Mac finally whispered to his section second in command, "They're changing. They won't underestimate us next time." The 2 IC nodded. "Good, that means they'll make mistakes trying to adjust." And that was the truth. When an enemy changed tactics under pressure, they often overcorrected. They tried too hard. They worried too much. They made choices driven by fear instead of logic. Mac knew the next encounter would be different. The VC scouts would be sharper, angrier, and eager to prove they still owned the jungle. But he also knew the Australians were ready, strong, prepared, united, and now unpredictable. What the VC thought they understood was slipping away. The Australians were rewriting the rules of movement, silence, and concealment. And the jungle was taking notice. Night fell quickly in the jungle. One moment the trees still held a warm glow from the fading sun, and the next, darkness pressed down like a heavy hand. The canopy swallowed the last hints of light, leaving only thin streaks of moonshine filtering through the leaves. The air cooled slightly, but the damp humidity never truly released its grip. This was the time when most units preferred to hunker down. Movement at night was risky. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Even experienced soldiers struggled with shadows that looked like shapes and shapes that looked like shadows. But Mac wasn't like most soldiers. He gathered his patrol in the dark, kneeling among thick ferns, faces barely visible. They moved out, slowly, quietly, purposefully. Every step was deliberate, heel down, foot rolled forward, weight shifted carefully. Each man lifted his knees higher than usual to avoid catching vines. Rifles stayed tight to their bodies. No one dared whisper. Night movement wasn't just a skill. It was a mindset. You had to be calm. You had to be patient. You had to trust the man in front and the man behind. For Mac's patrol, trust was already forged by sweat, exhaustion, and repeated contact with danger. Several kilometers away, the Viet Cong scouts regrouped around a small campfire hidden beneath an overhang of tangled roots. They spoke in low tones, frustration simmering beneath their calm fronts. Fan sat with his back against a tree, jaw tight. He stared at the flames, replaying every moment of the day. He had never failed to track an enemy patrol this badly. Not once. "They are learning," he said quietly. One of the younger scouts shook his head. "They are slow, they always move slowly, that has not changed." Fan's voice hardened. "They moved slowly on purpose today." Silence followed. The idea unsettled them. If the Australians were deliberately adjusting their pace, altering their rhythm and breaking their patterns, then the jungle was no longer predictable. The routines the VC relied on, the maps they drew, the assumptions they held, were starting to crumble. Fan rubbed a hand over his face. "If they move at night too, we will lose them completely." Another scout scoffed lightly. "Australians do not like the night, they prefer daytime patrols." Fan met his eyes. "That was before." The fire crackled softly. No one argued again. About an hour after dark, Mac halted his patrol with a raised hand. The men froze instantly. A faint sound drifted through the trees, voices, muffled, distant, but definitely human. He crouched and motioned for everyone to drop low. They eased into a shallow depression behind a thicket of tall grass. The darkness worked to their advantage. The wind shifted slightly, carrying more voices toward them. Mac listened carefully, counting the tones, trying to separate them. Maybe 5, maybe 6, the VC scouts. He gestured for the patrol to spread out, forming a wide arc. Not an ambush, just a silent observation line. Mac wanted to know how the scouts acted at night. Were they bolder, more cautious, more predictable? He lowered himself behind a fallen log, cheek pressed to the stock of his rifle. Sweat rolled down his neck, but he didn't move. He controlled his breathing. He focused on sound more than sight. The VC voices grew louder. Then footsteps, soft, slow, but in the dark, even soft steps echoed in unexpected ways. Mac could tell they were searching. The scouts were moving in a loose formation, sweeping the area, looking for signs the Australians had doubled back. They stopped roughly 40 meters from the patrol. Fan whispered something sharp, his tone frustrated. Mac couldn't understand the language, but he recognized the emotion. The Vietnamese tone was strained, restless, almost anxious. Good, Mac thought. Let them doubt. Let them worry. Let them keep looking in the wrong places. One of the younger VC scouts climbed a sloping route and scanned the area with narrowed eyes. He couldn't see anything beyond arm's reach, but he was trying hard. Too hard. His breathing had picked up. His movements were jumpy. Mac studied him through the darkness. Pressure was affecting them. Their calm edges were fraying. The scout took another step, then froze. He stared directly toward Mac's position. Mac didn't move a muscle, not a finger, not an eyelid. The scout stiffened, sensing something he couldn't explain. Then a single night bird called from higher in the canopy, a long, low whistle. The scout jerked at the sound, exhaling sharply. His nerves betrayed him. Fan hissed quietly. "Enough. Fall back, this area is wrong." The scouts turned, slipping back into the trees, moving faster than before. Their earlier caution was replaced with urgency. Within minutes, their footsteps faded into silence. The Australians didn't move for 10 more minutes. Time stretches differently in the dark. Every second feels like a minute. Every minute feels like 5. But the discipline held. Finally, Max signaled the patrol to stand down. They didn't cheer, they didn't grin. Straining nerves were normal at night. Professional calm stayed on every face. Mac gathered them in a tight cluster. "They're rattled," he whispered. "And when an enemy gets rattled, they make mistakes." His men nodded slowly. They knew what he meant. Mistakes create openings. Openings end fights. 2 hours later, Mac led the patrol deeper into the jungle. He was now guiding them into a section of terrain with steep ridgelines and narrow saddle points, a place where movement was restricted, predictable, easy to monitor. A perfect place to make the enemy feel watched. They moved soundlessly along the ridge, moonlight brushing their helmets in faint silver. Every man's breathing synced with the next. They became like a single organism moving through the dark. At one point Dawson nearly slipped on a root, but he caught himself instantly, locking his legs, swallowing his breath. The man behind him, Corporal Reed, just tapped his shoulder softly, a silent "you're good." No words exchanged, but trust reinforced. This was the heart of soldiering: stillness under tension, calm under pressure, faith in your mates. Near the end of the ridge, Max stopped again. He'd found it. A choke point, narrow, enclosed, naturally funneled by thick vegetation on both sides. Anyone passing through would have no choice but to step in the exact center, perfect for what came next. An idea formed quickly in his mind. Not a full ambush, not a firefight, but a message. A controlled, deliberate action that would reach the VC commanders without revealing the patrol's position or strength. A turning point. Mac's voice lowered to a whisper. "We set up here. No shots unless I give the order. We're going to let them know we're one step ahead." The men nodded. They trusted him completely. In the darkness, in the heat, in the heavy silence of the jungle night, Mac's patrol prepared to make the Viet Cong scouts rethink everything. The next move would change the game, for good. The jungle after contact always felt different, quieter, thicker, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The Australian patrol stood still, listening for movement, waiting for any sign that the Viet Cong unit might regroup. But nothing came. No return bursts, no pursuit, no probing fire. The enemy had melted away into the dark leaves, leaving only the echo of a fight they didn't expect to lose. The men kept their spacing. 1 meter, 2 meters. Every soldier sweeping arcs with calm, practiced rhythm. No rushing. No talking. The jungle remained the same, but the air around them had shifted. The Australians had shown exactly what they were capable of, and word would soon travel through the Viet Cong ranks faster than any scout could move. They stepped off again, keeping their normal patrolling pace. Slow, controlled. The point man paused often, scanning shadows, reading the ground, tracks, disturbed leaves, broken bamboo. A cigarette butt still warm when he touched it with the tip of his finger. Signs that a larger VC group had passed through minutes earlier. But they weren't circling back. They were withdrawing. This was the pattern that seasoned Australian patrol commanders knew well. When a Viet Cong unit encountered an Australian section that moved silently and hit suddenly, they often pulled back to reassess. They had learned, sometimes the hard way, that these weren't typical Western troops. These were men trained not to dominate space with firepower, but to control space with silence. The patrol paused in a small depression. The section commander raised a hand, signaling a short halt. Water bottles came out quietly. 1 sip only. Sweat kept running down their faces, soaking their shirts, dripping off their elbows. Everyone was tired. Everyone was carrying weight that pressed into their shoulders and hips, but nobody complained. Fatigue was normal. Heat was normal. Uncertainty was normal. The commander knelt beside his radio operator. A quick check. Battery level. Antenna secure. Recent transmissions. Brigade had no new intel. The area was still considered active. The Viet Cong regiment nearby was known for aggressive scouting, but after the firefight, something had changed. Even the veterans could feel it. A strange, cautious calm spreading through the trees. The patrol kept moving until they reached a small dry creek bed. The commander used it to mask their movement. The sides offered shallow cover. The overhead branches filtered sunlight into thin green rays. Perfect. The section spread out again, 2 soldiers in the lead, 1 covering the high ground. Every man checked his sector with slow, steady sweeps, breathing through their noses, listening for anything unusual. A twig cracked, the kind of crack you feel before you hear. Everyone froze, weapons angled, eyes locked, ears straining for the next sound, but it didn't come. The commander looked to his scout, a slow eyebrow raise. The scout pointed 1 finger to a cluster of thick vines. That was enough. The section adjusted their arcs, covering, watching, waiting. A small shadow flickered, not a soldier, a boar, average size, snout rooting through leaves. It glanced up at them and then trotted away, unimpressed. The tension eased, shoulders lowered, but not much. Animals often scattered when humans moved near, but sometimes their movement masked something else. The Australians kept the same caution as before. Lessons in the jungle were rarely taught twice. If you ignored the first one, you often didn't get a second chance. As the day pushed toward late afternoon, the patrol reached a ridge overlooking a valley floor. From here, they saw faint movement, dark shapes crossing a trail far below. Viet Cong, probably the same group from earlier but now moving fast in a loose file, no longer stalking, no longer confident. The commander studied their formation through his scope. No heavy weapons, no flanking element. They were leaving the area quickly. The Australian scout whispered, "They're spooked." The commander nodded. "Good. Means they won't try anything stupid before night." This wasn't arrogance. It was experience. The Viet Cong usually respected what they didn't fully understand. And after facing an Australian patrol that moved like ghosts and hit like lightning, they knew these soldiers were not predictable targets. Not loud, not careless, not easy to map. The patrol continued toward their planned night harbor. Every step grew harder as the humidity thickened and night approached. Mosquitoes buzzed relentlessly. Leech bites stung against boot seams. Shirts clung to backs. But the men kept moving. They reached the harbor site, a small, defensible patch of ground surrounded by ridges. The section dug in quietly, claymores set, sentry roster organized, everyone eating cold rations. No fires. No voices above a whisper. This was routine. Repetition made them efficient, and efficiency kept them alive. The commander went man to man, checking positions. Each soldier gave a quiet nod. Some nibbled biscuits. Some wrote quick notes in field books. Some cleaned their rifles in the last minutes of light. One sat still, staring at nothing, replaying the afternoon firefight in his head. It wasn't fear. It was processing. Every veteran did it. If you didn't, mistakes stayed with you. Darkness settled fast. The sounds of the jungle changed again. Frogs calling, insects humming, branches creaking under shifting air. Sentries listened to everything. A distant pop echoed once. Maybe a signal shot. Maybe a farmer scaring animals. Hard to know, but not close enough to act on. Hours passed. Near midnight, soft footsteps approached from the east. The sentry tensed, gripping his rifle, eyes narrowing into the dark. The steps were slow, deliberate, then stopped. Silence stretched long enough to sharpen nerves. 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Finally, the steps retreated. The sentry whispered to the commander someone was checking distance. "VC Scout," the commander whispered back. "They won't push closer. Not tonight, not after what happened." At dawn, the patrol moved out again. Quiet, alert, stronger than they felt. The commander had a final thought as he stepped into the trees. This is how fear spreads, not by shouting, but by silence, discipline, and results. Word would travel through Viet Cong camps. Talk of an Australian patrol that moved unseen, struck hard, and disappeared before gunfire could be returned. Stories grow on their own. Some details get twisted. But one thing would remain true. The Viet Cong learned the hard way that mocking Australian patrols was easy until they actually met one.